Welcome. We have the May Community Food Projects Community of Practice, and we're so excited to see you all. And if you didn't meet me last time, my name's Alyssa. I'm from the new to the FSLN Backbone team. And today we're actually going to start by warming up the chat. If you want to go to the next one, Emma, we're going to ask you to put in the chat your name, your organization, location, and one practice that helps motivate or engage or energize you when you have deep work to do. So whenever you really got to buckle down, like grant writing, what's one thing that helps you focus and get going, whether it's writing or reading or strategizing? What's one thing that keeps you going or gets you energized? So yeah, oh, it's so great to see you. Everybody's coming from coffee. Love it. We were just talking about a little caffeine is needed. Sugar, also great. I love this. I also love music and setting the mood. Thank you so much. I hope this helps everyone get some ideas as we're talking about grant writing today. So thank you so much for being here and participating and playing along. If you want to go to the next one, Emma, while people continue to add theirs, I will go ahead and do the intro. So again, my name's Alyssa Thayer. I am new to the FSLN Backbone team, and this space is a partnership between ISED Solutions and also the FSLN. ISED Solutions is the lead on the CFP National TA and Training Grant through the USDA-NIFA. The purpose of this space, just as kind of to ground us, is to really resource folks doing the work. So resource anyone and learning from each other and connecting around solidarity and shared experiences of this community-based food systems work. So we're so excited to have you here, and we're honored because we know there's so many polls on everyone's time. We're so honored to be with you today in this space. And I am joined here by Emma Bliss and Andy Fisher from ISED. And today we are going to really dig into the Community Food Projects Grant. It's big, it's federal, and it's a lot of work, but it's also a great tool for getting seed funding for a community-based food systems project. And so we're going to unpack and learn from the best. Emma and Andy have been doing a lot of TA for a number of years around this work. So we're going to learn from them, and we're also going to learn from current grantees. So we have Larry Fisher from the Appalachian Center for Economic Networks, based out of Ohio, and Stephanie Fulkins from the Ann and Robert H. Lurie Children's Hospital, Chicago. And we're going to open it up at the end to kind of workshop some different questions that you all may have that we don't get covered in this space. And this is all hopefully going to support anybody and everyone who's excited about this work and curious about this grant to be resourced and ready for what's next. So the first thing we like to do in any FSLN space is to really ground ourselves in these cultural agreements. And just remind everyone that these aren't one-time rules. They're really living commitments that we return to at each gathering. And this work is really, it's relational at its core. And it asks for connection and authenticity and openness. And to make that kind of space possible, we have to hold ourselves accountable and really create a space that honors these agreements. So just to pull out a few, we honor and celebrate our collective wisdom. Together, we know a lot. We talk about that one a lot in these community of practices because, you may, and we're going to talk about this and do a little poll in a second, but you may be someone who's just curious about this grant, or you may be someone who's already been through the process and really has some knowledge to share. So when you think about everyone that's in this room, it's really amazing. And, with that collective wisdom, I think we'll all feel so supportive and resourced. Give grace to one another is another one I always like to lift up, and approach conflict with curiosity. This is a moment, we're all bringing our excitement and interest and inquiry into the space and remembering that the questions we bring are really about learning from each other and wanting to really build off that wisdom. So those are just a couple that I wanted to lift up today, but feel free to kind of read through this group and pick out one that really speaks to you today. we're always trying to kind of create this grounded space around these agreements. Um, a couple of things just for Zoom housekeeping. So anyone who is able to turn on their cameras, it's always wonderful to be able to talk to real humans. A reminder to stay on mute when you're not talking, but please unmute when you are. So, you will be welcome to, raise your hand or put something in the chat and we may be able to call on you. And if that's the case, we'd love to hear your voice. We did put AI bots and note takers in the waiting room so that we can really connect those, human beings again with each other. And you may have seen that we are recording the content of the presentation so we can share it with anybody who is unable to attend today's session. But what we'll do is we'll make sure to edit out the Q&A and discussion part at the end so that everybody can feel free to show up as themselves and ask their messy kind of, in the moment questions that they may not want to have recorded. So now I am going to turn it over to Emma and we're going to dive right into the content and hopefully it'll be super helpful in your CFP journey. So go ahead, Emma.
Hi, everybody. Nice to see so many familiar faces. I'm Emma Bliss, and I work for ISED Solutions as well as Andy Fisher, who's going to talk us through this grant in a minute here. And while I intro us a little bit, we want to get a sense of what your experience of this grant is. Maybe you have applied before, and you're coming back to it again. Maybe you've received a grant even, and you want to reapply for a different project in your organization. Or maybe you've seen this name and you've no idea really what it is, but you think it might have something in there for you. So just fill out this poll real quick so we can get a sense of where you're at. All of it is welcome today. The purpose of this training on the USDA-NIFA Community Food Project grant is to help you assess if this is the right grant for you. As Alyssa said, it's a big grant. If you have federal grant writing experience, you know that it takes quite a bit of work and they're competitive. And we really want to make sure that you are set up to be to apply, but also maybe decide that if it's not the right fit for you. And that's part of the grant writing experience as well, is some things are not right and some things are, and we want to make sure that you put your effort towards something that could fit your work and your organization. So as that's getting filled out, looks like
And we
most of
already have a
it.
lot.
I
Yeah, we have
know.
most of them. I didn't want to end it too early, but everybody can just put in their last clicks. I'll end it and we'll share it just so that we can see who's in the room and move forward. All right, I see it
Let me
slowing
close it.
down.
We're kind of
All
plateauing
right,
here.
perfect.
Okay,
All
sweet.
right.
This is really helpful. Okay, this is great. A lot of people seem to have been familiar with federal grant writing and have applied for grants, so that's awesome. Definitely speak up if you've had experiences and thoughts about the process. And a lot of you, it's your first time hearing about this grant, so that's exciting. Welcome to CFP. I'm excited that we get to share about this grant. There's a lot of federal grants, and yeah, sometimes they slip through the cracks, so that's part of our job is to clue you in. So we're going to talk about an intro of us, who we are as a TA provider, an overview of CFP and what it funds, where the money comes from, some questions to consider when you think about applying. We are also going to bring in a couple active grantees, Stephanie and Larry, Alyssa mentioned, and they're going to talk about a little bit about their projects and their experience applying and how they determined that this was a good grant for them and where their organization is in terms of capacity and project work. And then we'll have some Q&A to answer your questions and talk you through some next steps. If you get through all of this and you think, yep, I want to move forward with this process, I think it could be a good fit, we'll talk you through how to access our support, where to go to get information on the USD website, and all that fun stuff. So I'm just going to do a quick who we are, and then I'll turn it over to Andy, and he's going to get really deep into the weeds with this grant. So we are ISED Solutions, and we are the recipient of the technical assistance grant that is through this CFP grant program. It has been written into this grant since its inception that an organization is awarded a grant to support other grantees and other applicants of the program. So importantly, we are not USDA. We are a independent nonprofit, but we have this grant from USDA, and we work with them a little more closely than perhaps you might with your grant. Because we're not USDA, we don't have access to portals. We can't, recover your passwords or help you with that kind of technical assistance. That's not our purview. We don't have any decision-making power over your grants. If we get to a point in which we might support you actually on your written narrative and we give you feedback and that kind of stuff, that is not an official review. We don't decide. We just try and get you to a place that might be a little more competitive based on the grant goals and guidelines. And we might refer you to USDA. There are things that we do not have the answer to. Sometimes they might not, but they at least have a little more decision-making power. And so we might pass you along. So that's kind of the overview of who we are. And we're a two-person team. It's me and Andy. So if you reach out to us, it is one of us. I think last year I helped about 250 applicants. So we try and be as swift as possible, but just be aware that it's me and Andy on the other side of the emails. There's not a bigger team. So what we do is we help you develop a project idea, and in the initial phases, talk you through whether or not we think it aligns with the grant goals. We hope that when you come to us, you already have an idea, but perhaps you need a little bit of support fleshing it out and making it fit more within the grant goals and purpose and all that kind of stuff. The NOFO, the Notice of Funding Opportunity, it's important to say, we'll restate this a few times, is not out yet. We believe it is out very soon. It's going to be a very short application cycle. So that's why we're doing this right now, so that you can get your head in the right space. But we are very well versed in CFP. We read the NOFO really carefully. You should as well, but we maybe have a little more background information on it. So we help you, answer your questions around the NOFO. If you're confused about the government language that can be a little bit hard to read sometimes, we can maybe help you with interpretation of that. And then the sort of the final stage, when you're actually putting together your application, we can help you with the narrative, which is sort of the bulk of your application, and your budget narrative. And we do review of that. You send it to us, and we give you our feedback on that. And that's sort of the last phase of support to you all. And it's about 2.5 hours of free TA per applicant. So as I said, we're a small team, so we do have to limit it a little bit, but we have found that 2.5 hours is still quite a bit of time to give to you. Yeah, I think that's the overview, and I'm going to pass it off to Andy, who's the project director for our TA grant, and he's going to talk to you about this grant and what it is and what it means and what you should think about in the process of wanting to apply.
Sure. Can you pop the next slide? Great. So, welcome. Thank you, Emma. That was great. That was a great introduction. I appreciate it. So, community food projects. It's been around since 1996. It was originally passed in the 1996 Farm Bill. Money has been given out every year since then. It is mandatory funding. It is in the baseline, so we don't need to go to Congress for an appropriation every year, as with some programs. It is run by the National Institute of Food and Agriculture, which runs a lot of competitive grant programs such as Beginning Farmer and GusNIP and others. So they're used to working with competitive grants. They're highly skilled. They've got great processes. And so it's well established. Let's just put it that way. There is only $5 million a year that is given out, which turns into actually about $4.8 million once they take over some of the administrative costs. So who's eligible? Mainly nonprofits. If you're fiscally sponsored and have a nonprofit that's your fiscal sponsor, that's fine. Tribal organizations are fine. There's been a couple exceptions over the years that I've seen where one LLC got funded, one city got funded, but generally not. Generally, it's really 95% of the organizations that get funded are nonprofits or tribal entities. Okay, next slide. So the purpose of the program, as established by Congress, is to meet the food needs of low-income individuals. So it's very much grounded in in addressing food insecurity and also obesity rates, health disparities. It's not about charity. It's about increasing the food self-reliance of communities. There are now in the guidelines kind of a focus on short-term and long-term food security. So we're seeing increasingly more proposals are doing a little bit more around food distribution, mobile markets, some food pantries, but always within the context of a broader kind of more food systems approach. So it's very much grounded in a food systems approach. It's very much grounded in having a lot of partners. You will not get funded if you try to put in a proposal just by yourself with your own organization. Um, it needs to have a systems orientation, needs to have multiple partners on the ground. Marketing, local food system development are all goals. Food access, nutrition education are all things that are very much included in this grant and very much priorities. Um, you can get money for a tractor, for a greenhouse, but this is not an equipment grant. So if you're just looking to spend $200,000 in building a commercial kitchen, probably not the right place, probably the wrong tree to be barking up. But if you need some equipment as part of that commercial kitchen that you're building to implement your project, then that's fine. But again, there's not a hard and fast rule on that, but it is something that reviewers look at. I should also mention that it's been getting very competitive lately. I think the last go around, I heard about 400 proposals were submitted. 20 typically get funded. So it used to be 1 in 8, 1 in 12, and now it's probably 5% of projects get funded because there is not that much money for it. So if this is a priority for you, my lobbying advice is to contact Congress and encourage them to put more money into this project. What else was I going to say? Okay, so thank you for that, Emma. So there are two types of grants that are funded through this project. One is kind of what we call an implementation grant or a community food project grant, which is for carrying out a project. And that typically runs from 1 to 4 years. Most grantees ask for 3 to 4 in recognition that there's kind of a ramp up phase. The least you can ask for is 125 grand. The most you can ask for is $400,000. And then there's also planning grants, and those planning grants are they can be for policy development. They can be for you're trying to get a project off the ground and you don't have your partners together. You're trying to do a community food assessment to understand what the community capacity and needs are. So those run from 1 to 3 years, anywhere from $25,000 to $50,000. It is a dollar for dollar match. So that is often a serious limitation on applicants. You do have to put up, if you're asking for 100 grand, you have to put up 100 grand. Well, you can't ask for 100. If you're asking for 200,000, you have to put up 200,000 in match at least. There's a little bit of advantage if you have more match, but not necessarily. And that match can be cash, it can be in kind, and it cannot be from another federal grant. So you can't use your GusNIP grant to do that. It's got to be private money, and it can be from your partners. So people typically use in-kind labor if they have land as a community garden or a garden that you're using. The value of that land, the value of a free rent you're getting are very common sources of match. As I kind of referenced before, it is peer reviewed. So people out in the field who are, again, your peers, are reviewing this proposal. 3 reviewers look at it and will score your proposal. There's a kind of a complicated process by which NIFA goes through kind of a multiple stages to review that proposal. They'll get scored and they'll get rescored and they'll get, there's like basically 2 to 3 stages in that process by which they'll winnow it down and excuse me, and rank your proposal. And the top scoring proposals in each category, planning and implementation, will get funded. There is now, I should mention that there is now a political review process, and that the government has implemented on all grants. So once it gets reviewed by your peers, it's recommended for funding. The peer review panel does not make decisions. It recommends to NIFA. NIFA will make their own choices. Then it goes up the food chain to the office of the secretary, and it'll be a political review, which we can get into with questions later. We don't know how long the application period is. It used to be 60 to 90 days. They're pushing the envelope this year because they have to get all the grants out by September 30th. So anywhere from 30 to 45 days is what we're guessing. So if it came out tomorrow, it would be the end of June, early July would be the turnaround time for you. Okay, next. So what gets funded? So wide variety of proposals. This is not like GusNIP or that has specific types of proposals that are SNAP incentives or produce prescription. We see a wide variety, and over the years it's changed a lot. So farm to school has often gotten funded. Food loss and recovery as part of a bigger, broader effort. A lot of food hub work is getting funded now. Anything that's aggregating food and distributing it in low-income communities is funded. A lot of production, a lot of working with local farmers on producing food, supporting local agriculture to get that into either rural or urban communities. A lot of times that have a business incubation component to it. Some economic development aspect of it is always highly valued. It could be community gardens, it could be youth training, market gardens are common. Nutrition education components are often part of the proposal, but not exclusively. They won't fund just a nutrition education project, but that's part of a kind of a food production or distribution project will often be part of that. Cooking classes, food as medicine, procurement, local procurement will be in there. Farmers markets, farm stores, co-ops, etc. Okay. Next. Okay, there we go. So I think Larry or Emma, are you taking this?
Yeah, great. And
Okay.
thanks for the questions in the chat, guys. I'm trying to keep up with them and answer them as they come in, but I know Alyssa is keeping an eye on them too, so we'll try and circle back around. A lot of questions about the budget, which I know is something that we often get, so we'll try and answer some of those. Yeah, so we wanted to bring in a couple grantees to speak to their experience, one to highlight the work that they're doing. So maybe you can get a little bit more of a sense of what a well-rounded project looks like that is awarded this funding. And then also to hear from them a little bit about what were some of the challenges they faced in applying for the grant. Maybe how they determined that this was a good fit for them, a good time for their organization to apply, give you a little bit of insight that Andy and I can't necessarily because we are not in their position. So I'm going to pass it over to Larry Fisher. His organization is an active awardee and is coming to an end in your project, I believe. So I'm going to pass it to you to talk about your work, and let me pop up your slides if you want to intro yourself while I get those going. Go ahead, Larry.
Yeah, thank you, Emma. So again, Larry Fisher with AceNet down in Athens, Ohio. We are 41 years in working in local food systems work. We've been at this a while. We are probably the second oldest shared use commercial kitchen in the United States, maybe the longest serving now that we've been at that for about 30 years. So we've been at that for a while. This is our fourth CFP program over my 24 years at AceNet. We have applied 12 times and have hit 4 out of 12. So we feel, of course, what we've seen is the competitive nature that both everyone, Emma and Andy, have mentioned, make it a little bit harder. Back in the early days, there weren't that many people applying, so you had a pretty good chance of getting a grant. The last probably 8 to 10 years has been a little bit more competitive. And so this one is all about accessible mobile markets using based on a model of what we call the veggie van. It is designed with 3 partners, ourselves, Community Foods Initiative, which is an on-the-ground, smaller nonprofit that actually engages at the street level, if you would. And then another partner is Rural Action, which has been a part of sustainable ag and sustainable forestry here in Southeast Ohio for probably about as long as AceNet has. So the title, Building Rural Hunger-Free Communities, of course, you'll never be hunger-free. So will always need support. So that's something that we keep in mind. So the next slide, I think we look at it in three ways. One was getting mobile, getting our partners, and then getting creative in how we do our work. This is the side of the van and then the back entrance, and you can see all the various plant starts and produce that this thing hauls out into various communities in about a 3 to 4 county area. And we get it funded by local foundations, also by such federal grant programs such as the CFP, USDA, rural development. So we find various different methods of trying to keep this project going. So the first slide talks about getting mobile. So part of the CFP grant is the partners that Andy mentioned. And part of the partners are not just the ones doing the work with us, but it's the partners where we can go and present and the communities that we can work in. And trying to find the right champions in each one of these communities. Here in this slide, as we start the giveaway in May, you see the towns are in MacArthur, Coolville, and Gloucester, 3 different counties, 3 different very rural communities, and different partners that we have in each one of those communities that we have had to develop well before the grant's ever been written, so that we know that we've got that support, that when we run into these communities, they'll be ready to receive us and again, help us make it a little bit more sustainable. The other one, of course, is the partnership with the Nelsonville Senior Center, is another place that we've worked with. That again, this is programs already in place that we know are coming up here in June and July. That trying again to find the partner to bring this van and to pop up and do workshops in these communities is all about the partners, the towns, who there in those communities are people that we can work with. The second slide is a little bit more on the partnerships. If you go to the third slide there, getting our partners. So along with the partners who might draw funding from the grant as well, we have the 2 other funded partners. There's also the other partners that we need to either provide match and support that Andy talked about, but also provide us access and shared marketing. So the 2 ends are the Veggie Van mobile market that is partnered up with at Ohio University. We have the Heritage College of Osteopathic Medicine, and they have a mobile clinic shown in their van. And so one of the partnerships we've developed with them is that wherever they take their van and we do the planning, we'll plan out joint opportunities for them to host and shared market their mobile unit, as well as the veggie van coming in and bringing the fresh produce into the communities. And so you'll see those 2. The one partnership is in Belpre, and another county is Washington County, and it was partnered with a pharmacy there that they had everything set up. The one on the right is the Chester Hill and McConnellsville, 2 communities that were partnered up with the Church of Christ. So we're always looking for those partners again in these communities that we know that can sustain us and help sustain the market. In the middle slide, the bottom was the fundraiser. The top part of it is looking at the partnership with our Athens Farmers Market and our other regional farmers markets to get people to set up mini markets and be very mobile and flexible to come to these counties and these other places that we're serving. So one of the things with these pop-ups that I think has been critical for us is to keep coming back with different approaches and different times they see us, so that we are always present in these communities. Something in 24 years of me being in a nonprofit world, so many times we come in, we do a project for a year, and we jump out, or 2 years, and we don't get seen again. So one of the things that we're always at ISED is these long-term commitments to being very present and being a part of a community that we choose to serve. And so, yep, so these are some of the partners. And then the third last slide is part of the grant is getting creative. When we first started our Food We Love program, which was introducing local foods back in around 2002, one of the things we learned is how important it is to build relationships between the producer, the farmer, the grower, and the community. And so we use the technique that most people do. Nothing is new here. It seemed to be new back 20 some years ago. But the idea of meeting the farmer and having displays and bringing them out to the mobile sites with us Sometimes we write a stipend in to include them. So that's something to think about when you do your grant and your project, is how can you use stipends to engage farmers, engage producers to come out into the communities and meet people, so that all of a sudden that relationship starts to get built. And then probably one of the craziest things I think we've done that I wasn't so sure about is the third image to the right, is the basic kitchen supplies. As we work with people with fresh produce and fresh vegetables and try to get them to understand how to use them and utilize them, one of the things we ran into was people don't always have the right tools and utensils to do the work they need in the home. They just don't have this stuff. And so after surveying and paying attention to questions and problems when we set up the pop-up markets with the veggie van, was developing a list of supplies and tools that people needed. And then we wrote that into the grant so that we could actually go and show up with, as you see some of the different things here, with the cutting boards, the knives, sometimes it's been graters. And so it's just different things that are not expensive, but they can get hands-on and get donated to them. And then that enables them to go do the work that they're going to do with whatever produce they picked up. So always looking at, the one thing I would say is I've been a reviewer of these grants as well. And being creative, being innovative, being thoughtful is always something that is very important to a peer review, to make sure that you're doing something that, yeah, it's been done before, it's been tried before, but here's a different pitch and a different angle that we're going to take a look at. So trying to think about being creative in the way you present yourself, even to the grant writing, but also to the communities and the people you're going out to visit. That's always a big plus for us, is always how to find that new niche, that new creative way of introducing people to people. So that's my slides. So I talk quick, I know. Yeah, so whenever you want to get to the Q&A and we can talk about the process. I've been actively involved in writing 12 of these over the years. And so we'd be glad to share any information, answer any questions you might have.
Thanks, Larry. Yeah, I'll have some questions to ask you and Stephanie to get at some of those process questions. But I do want to just point out one thing that is important. As you said, Larry, your organization has applied for multiple of these and received multiple, and that is an important point. I think I've seen a few people on here that I think have received before, if not applied. And the sort of important thing here is, if your organization has applied for a grant before and received it, you can't reapply for the same project, right? So if you've been doing a farmer's market project, you got the funding, and then a few years later that funding ends and you go, you know what, we want it again for the same project, that is not allowable. This is considered a one-time infusion of money into a project to sort of kick it off. However, it is not uncommon to be an organization that has received it multiple times for different projects. So keep that in mind. If you've received it before and you have something else you want to kick off, then yes, you're absolutely welcome to apply, and you've probably gone through the process before, so it might even be easier for you at this point. Okay, that's awesome. I'm gonna move on to introduce Stephanie before we get into some questions. So Stephanie has a project in Chicago, and they were just awarded in this past grant cycle, so they're at the beginning of their project. So I will pass it over to you, Stephanie.
Thanks, Emma. Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. So Emma said, I'm from Ann and Robert H. Lurie Children's Hospital of Chicago. We're the largest pediatric specialty care provider in the region, and about 60% of the patients that we see are screening positive, or sorry, not screening positive, but are on Medicaid or uninsured. And so food insecurity is one of the most common health-related social needs that we see. And so my team within the hospital is responsible for the hospital's community efforts aimed at alleviating food insecurity, nutrition insecurity, and promoting physical activity as well. So when we first saw this RFP, this was our first time applying, first time being awarded. It really aligned well with some of the existing work that we were already doing and some of the work that we had been wanting to advance, and we're just looking for the resources to advance. So for this particular project, since about 2023, we have been convening food organizations on the west side of Chicago and working on a variety of capacity building, local sourcing efforts, making sure ourselves and other hospitals in the area were working as close as we could with the local food system. And then the timing when we applied in the last cycle was such that Illinois had also received approval for nutrition supports to be covered in the 1115 Medicaid waiver. And so at that point in time, it was estimated anywhere from 70 to $90 million could flow into the local food system if we could build the right infrastructure for food organizations to capture reimbursement. So our grant is really focused on improving the readiness of food organizations serving the west side of Chicago, which, if you're not familiar with the west side of Chicago, is the part of our city that sees some of the highest rates of food insecurity and some of the lowest rates of food access. And so there's a lot of need, and the organizations already serving that area are doing some great work. The other piece of it too, I think that maybe was compelling or that excited us about taking on the project is it really was this one-time infusion over the 3 years to focus on providing training and technical assistance with the goal of being able to then continue the program through the Medicaid or other forms of reimbursement. Also, we had recently secured some philanthropic support that allowed us to do a match on the grant. And so the way we structured it, I saw some questions about food procurement. And this is, we said CFP is covering all of the costs around TA and training. And then we are using our match dollars to purchase medically tailored food boxes for patients based on whatever the group comes up with to improve readiness. So we kept all of our food costs completely as part of the match component. And then just where we are, well, I don't have slides. We've been having a lot of meetings and developing a readiness assessment. But what we've done to date is we worked with some implementation scientists and the Food is Medicine Coalition to build a readiness assessment. We've had 25 community food organizations take that assessment so far. And so of about 25 domains for readiness that we were looking at when it comes to seeking Medicaid reimbursement, we've identified 3 priority domains. And so we brought the group together, we looked at that data. And so the 25 organizations in our collaborative, we've selected 2 projects to move forward as a group that will improve readiness. One is around working with farmers, the distributors of food, and the healthcare systems to come up with local menus that are tailored both to what the farmers are growing and when, as well as different disease states and what's required for patients with those diagnoses. And then the other project that we've come up with is better coordinating referrals among all of our organizations so that when the funds start flowing, those referrals are less administratively burdensome on our partners, and we can get more referrals through with less staff and lower cost. And then as far as training priorities, we've identified a need to better understand how to more rigorously evaluate these programs, specifically wanting to look at health outcomes from a lot of our community partners, and they want access to that data so they can understand the impact of their own programs. And then also training around how to better engage community health workers in this process. We've sort of uncovered that a lot of the outreach the local food organizations are doing could probably be reimbursed by community health worker dollars. So then they could capture reimbursement both on the nutrition support side and the CHW side. And so pretty soon we'll be using our matching funds to pilot that local food menu, pilot some of the coordinated referrals. And then our plan is to do the readiness assessment then every 6 months over the course of the 3-year project, and just continuing tailoring the training and the technical assistance. But yeah, that's a little bit about our project and what we're working on.
Thanks, Stephanie. Appreciate it. Yeah, so I want to get at some questions that are coming up and things we want to tee up to talk about a little bit more. So when Andy and I are helping applicants early on their application, the question we get the most is very simple. It's just, is my project a good fit for this, right? And part of that contains in our minds organizational capacity, not just in applying for the grant, which is, as we've said, it's a pretty big application. It's pretty competitive, takes quite a bit of time to put into the application. But then once you have the funding, does your organization have the ability to manage it properly, to do the reporting, to hit your outcomes and your goals that you said you're going to do? And so for you two, and either of you can answer this, and Larry, you've done this a number of times now with this grant. How did you know in your organization that this was a good time for you to apply for this and that you had the capacity to continue to manage it?
So I'm off mute, Stephanie, so I'll jump in first. So for us, it's always about what's going on the ground. We try not to, when I first came on board, we tried to be the driver to make things happen. And anymore, since I became executive director, we've been trying to be the one that helps fulfill what the communities want. And that's been a big change for AceNet. So for us, it's like what's out there now, what is the work that's being done by other nonprofits that need help and need the resources. Again, AceNet's 40 years established, a $1.5 million budget typically. And so what we're looking for is projects that can do this 125, to $200,000 range that can help smaller nonprofits. And so we're always looking at those kind of partnerships and what's coming up from the ground in certain communities, and other certain smaller nonprofits where we think we can be the 501c3, we can be the funded partner, and then do the subawards out to some of these projects that are going on. So we try to see what's going on. And I think the other thing that sets it is always, when we started, is always implementing from the planning project. So we started a food congress from our very first one in, I think, 2003, the first one I was associated with. And that has actually been sustained now for 20 some years in some fashion or other. So we're always talking with other partners about what kind of work needs to be done, where it needs to be done. And that kind of helps us establish when to apply, when we know we're ready, and when you know you've got the match. Because one of the biggest things is if I'm sure it's still the same way, Andy can probably fill it in. But if you write a 3-year grant, you got to kind of prove your match for the 3 years. You can't say, I have match for year one, and hopefully we'll find something in year 2 and 3. It doesn't work that way. And so you've got to really spend, and that's what slowed us down several times. One, if you work the project, you can't write again. Sometimes we take a gap year or two, so we're not right on top of another grant. And then the other part is waiting to find the partners and build the backbone support that, even what Stephanie talked about is finding those that can provide the match for things that this grant cannot fund. And so that's kind of how we always judge it and decide when we're going to jump in.
From a capacity standpoint, I think we had conversations among several partners when we were looking at it about who would be the right lead applicant to put the grant through, who had the most capacity. It does tend, when we put these kind of grants together, it does tend to be our institution, just because we have a research institute associated with our hospital. And so they're very well versed in managing these kind of grants and what it takes. So one thought would be, for if your organization doesn't have that, which most of where I've ever worked, we never had that luxury, but maybe thinking about finding a partner, a local anchor institution, anyone who's participating in like a community health needs assessment, and think about bringing them in to help add some capacity. That's a huge thing that we can bring to partnership. The other piece of it I was thinking about was like, when will we be most competitive? We look at these federal opportunities, and historically you have been able to count on them coming out year after year. And so we were like, does this cycle make sense? Does next cycle make sense? And we just felt like with the way the waiver was going in the state, we were going to be most competitive, because at the end, we're hopefully going to be having the Medicaid reimbursement flowing too. And if we had waited until this cycle, the timeline wouldn't have worked out that way. People would not have been ready by the time the dollars were flowing. And then the third piece was, the match capacity. And we had the ability to hold our match dollars back until we heard about the award. And then once the award was made, those match dollars had already been sort of embargoed or set aside for this grant. So that's another piece to consider. You have to show the match dollars are there, but then they still have to be there when the award comes through as well. So that was a little bit tricky for us in planning out what were we going to spend before the grant and then what was still going to be available by the time of the award, because ours just took longer given different things that were happening at the federal level. So we were holding on to those dollars for quite a while.
Thanks, guys. I appreciate you all talking so much about the partnership piece. That's really important. And I think specifically what you were saying, Stephanie, about finding partners that maybe have capacity that you don't have and can add on to your grant in a meaningful way. So for example, our technical assistance grant, Food Systems Leadership Network, is a sub-awardee on our grant. And so they're able to bring in expertise and capacity that Andy and I don't have, and that's really helpful to us. So I think it can be, if it's less than 50% of your budget, that's the sub-awardee amount. So it can be a significant part of your project if there are things that you can't do internally. The other piece of the partnership element is that that's partly why we're doing this outreach now. Stephanie also said there are priorities that change with the RFAs. So a few years ago, it was food waste was a really high priority. So if you were doing food waste work, food recovery, then you maybe were going to be prioritized. And that changes a little bit. We don't know what this NOFO is going to have as its priorities. So there are some things Andy's going to share a little bit more soon that we don't have 100% answers to because it might change in this new NOFO. There is some stuff that shifts every time they redo the NOFO or the RFA. And I also want to just highlight the match and what's kind of the allowable cost piece. You both referenced something that's really important. We're getting a lot of questions about, what's allowable costs, like what you can use for match. And I think it's important to note that your match is an area where you can cover some things that can't be covered in your actual federal dollars. So like Stephanie was saying, they've put some things aside to be kept in the match that the federal dollars can't go towards. And so kind of in that align with that and what's allowable and what's not allowable for you too. What are some things in your project that have been easily funded by this? You've had no issues. And then a few things that were maybe pretty core to your project, but you've had to sort of section off because it's not allowable.
Yeah, we just put all of our food cost into the match to keep it really clean. I'm sure we'll get into this, but Andy was instrumental in getting us feedback on our proposal and reviewing things, and just between some back and forth with him and questions I had put to the USDA, it felt like it would be cleanest and most easy for reviewers to understand keeping food costs out of the federal program. But in hindsight, I'm actually very glad that we've done that, because we've been able now to go to other donors and say, hey, all of our staffing is covered federally for this project. Can you, we just need the food costs for our patients so we can continue to pilot and help organizations get ready. I was trying to think if there's what's been challenging maybe to find funding for that's not fully covered in CFP is evaluation component. We're monitoring readiness of the organizations to participate in reimbursement, but we're not monitoring health outcomes, patient satisfaction through the CFP grant. So we're having to find other dollars to cover some of the more patient-centered evaluation components that we would like to know as an organization. Yeah, Hester's question. We secured philanthropic donors, namely major gifts. So we went to individual donors who were pretty motivated by their gift being able to be matched with federal dollars. And so they helped bring the food costs in for us.
Larry, you want to add to that at all?
Yeah, so on the food side, same thing. We use a project called the Donation Station through our farmers markets. It's a different farmers markets to where people can either give cash or buy produce at the farmer's market and donate it to the facility so that when the veggie van goes out, pretty much everything's either been donated or we've used other, again, same thing, local foundations, other hospitals and stuff who will throw money in the pot to actually buy stuff. We buy stuff at a produce auction we have that's probably about 45 minutes away as well to help stock that van. The other thing is on the infrastructure, I think Andy mentioned we have the shared use kitchen is basically a food incubator. I don't like the word incubator, but we do that. And then one of the things we can do is the smaller equipment can run through the grant that you might be able to match some of your own funds with to buy a piece of equipment that you need to process or to distribute. The other thing that is very nice is all the marketing pieces that can roll through this thing that is sometimes very, very helpful. And then the other piece I'd talk about is the match of your facilities. Because of AceNet's shared use kitchen, processing room, dock spaces, we have walk-in coolers, freezers, all this stuff, that we can use that as match dollars. And it's a guaranteed revenue. So it's basically for us earned revenue that we know we have year after year after year because of our operations here. And so things that we have along those lines, we can use as in kind to help. And you've got it every year. So that's been a big way that AceNet, that's why AceNet generally asks to be the lead on these projects because we have infrastructure that can be used as match.
Thank you. I'm glad we got to the infrastructure and I'd say food purchasing are two of the most common questions we get about this funding. So I'm glad we got to touch on that a little bit. Yeah, I think we'll move on to the last bit of our presentation. Thank you so much to Stephanie and Larry. I think there were a few questions in the chat for you guys. If you're able to stick around a little bit, that's wonderful. If you want to respond, I see a question here about how did you budget for the project over the years? Maybe we can bring that up in the Q&A if you guys are still here, or if you want to pop a quick response in there. That's a kind of an important, but maybe a little bit of a bigger question to do in the chat, but important. So I'm going to pass it to Andy. We're going to talk about a couple of key considerations and then some questions to ask yourself to get yourself ready for this grant.
First of all, as Larry said, you do have to have your match for all the years of your project in place. You don't have to put it into your grant proposal in terms of this organization in terms of the exact origin of that match, but you are supposed to have it in place. And if you do get the award, you're going to go through a whole grants management process, which is going to force you to document that. And you do have to document it every year. So it's not, oh, we'll sell this amount of food. That doesn't count. It has to be in place. Future sales, future projections do not count. And as the slide says, this is an award that's supposed to fund either a new project or expansion of an existing project. You can't just say, we have this thing and we need the money to keep it going. That's not the point. The point is that it's funding to help get a project off the ground, not continue an existing project. Next. Oh, and before we get into executive orders, the one thing I do want to point out that, it's not a lot of money, right? I understand that either, in terms of the aggregate or in terms of the grant itself. But what we've found over the years is that this has been really important funding, and it's leveraged for recipient groups. It's leveraged huge impact beyond the dollars that are received. And that's because it basically provides kind of a USDA seal of approval to your project. Then kind of as Stephanie said, look, we've got this funding in place and USDA has approved this. It's there. We just need money to backfill in X, Y, and Z parts. So it's given for local foundations or foundations kind of at the family foundation level that may not have a lot of capacity to go through grant proposals or really fully understand the projects. It provides that kind of imprimatur of success, essentially, of again, that kind of seal of approval. Okay. Excuse me, I've got a bit of a cold. So I think we wanted to go over kind of what's changed in this grant program and in the Trump administration. So a few things, as we all know, we've all seen grants that have been terminated, especially last year, because they were working with specific communities that the administration is not in favor of. We've seen, you know, we've seen a change in the process where there's now a political review process at the USDA secretary level. They've made it clear through various executive orders that working with transgender folks or working that there's only two sexes and that don't refer to genders at all. So if you're working with communities that are LGBTQ, you may need to reorient the language that you use to explain that. So what we're seeing is what we're encouraging people to do is to be more general in terms of the community that they're working with. We're not specifically working with a Latino community in our city. We're working with everybody. And yes, we happen to serve a Latino community, but the project is open to everybody. So trying to not be exclusive, trying to be more generalized as to who you're funding without and avoiding specificity will kind of save you a lot of headache at that review level. They've also changed the terms of conditions that currently there's a lawsuit to block that, but if you were to get this grant, you would need to sign on to certain terms and conditions that prohibit the organization from doing DEI work in any shape or form from similar types of things. So they are looking at websites, they are looking at social media sites in terms of kind of the banned words that that the administration does not like, and you can all look up the list of those words. But so again, we don't know if that lawsuit's going to be successful. We don't know if that provision of those terms and conditions are going to hold, or if they're going to be thrown out in court. There are a number of resources along those lines. We can get those out to people. Farm Commons, for example, has a great resource on how to deal with the new terms and conditions. We have other language that we're putting together to help you navigate the language in your proposal to avoid getting blacklisted, essentially. Okay, so before you apply, ask yourselves. Okay. This is a lot of work, and I find that a lot of the work that Emma and I do is letting people know that maybe they're not ready for a proposal this year. Maybe they need to do a little bit more work. Maybe the project isn't quite the right fit at all. Maybe a planning grant is a better fit for you. Although I must say it is a similar amount of work for a lot less money. So some things you really need to be asking yourself, given how competitive it is and how much work this is. We talk about it being 80 to 100 hours worth of work. So it's not an insignificant amount of time, especially when it's compressed within a month or so. Do you have collaborations in place? Do you have the relationships and the trust to be able to implement your project? Is there a project that you've already developed that you want to do, or that you want to expand or modify? Or are you starting from scratch? If you're starting from scratch, maybe you want to take a year to figure it out. Maybe you're not quite at the right time. A lot of times what you do is really shaped by whether you have the match. As was put into the chat, it is onerous, and it does severely limit organizations that don't have either philanthropic resources near them, i.e. foundations, and that's why a lot of projects in the South have not, a lot of states in the South have not received a lot of funding. In part is because of that lack of philanthropic resources. Or do you have those connections in kind through your partners or yourself, and whether that's cash or not? Can you pull that together? And that's also going to shape the amount you're able to ask for. You see that all the time. And then, in terms of a kind of a no-no, again, if you don't have an existing project, if you don't have something in the hopper, we don't encourage you to create a project on the fly. I've done it in the past. I actually got it funded the first year of this grant program, and it was a disaster. You need some time to plan it out and to develop the resources and to think through your strategy, both on the project as well as on the proposal. And then finally, do you have the time to write a good proposal? I mean, again, it's 80 to 100 hours. So can you clear your calendar to write a really good proposal? If you can't, if you're writing this at the last minute, setting it in right at the deadline, you may be shooting yourself in the foot and may just not be worth your time unless you can use that proposal for some other purpose. Are you a good grant writer? Do you have access to someone who can write a good proposal? We've seen people doing more and more work through AI. I don't recommend it. I think it can get you a little bit and get you a head start, but submitting a chat GPT proposal is just going to get thrown out by reviewers because it's just too generic. And then, again, thinking about, okay, if you're going to put this 100 hours into this grant project, what could you do better with that time? Are there other fundraising opportunities that you might have that would be better? And thinking through your strategy in terms of, whether, again, you're approaching family foundations or major donors or other foundations or other events and the like, whether those would be more successful and you get a better return on investment for that time. Yeah, and that again, I really encourage you not to write a mediocre proposal. Only put something in if you really think it's a good proposal, and don't write a project that you know is a stretch. So I know that's kind of a subjective and a little bit onerous advice, but I think you know what's good and what's kind of like, well, maybe not. And so the funding would not be available until September. So we're be in a pretty tight timeline. Last time the go around, the proposals were submitted in the fall, and the money didn't come out until September. But now that timeline's pretty tight. Do you have the accounting system to manage a federal grant? Or do you have the capacity to do that? There is a fair amount of financial reporting. It is a drawdown. You're not going to have the cash in hand. You're going to be more or less on a reimbursement basis, and you need to be able to justify how you're doing that, and need to have some bookkeeping capacity so you don't get yourself into trouble. And I don't encourage this as a good first grant. Either. I mean, it could be a fine first federal grant, but I don't encourage it if you're just a startup and you have not received any funding before from other foundations. This is not a good place to cut your teeth on. It's just too complicated. So the funding of the RFA, or the funding notice of funding opportunity, should be coming out any day now. They've been telling us that for a long time. We keep looking at the NIFA website. We keep hoping it'll come out. They're running against the clock. So again, 30 to 45 days. You've got to do things ahead of time. If you haven't done this, create an account with SAM, a Systems Award Management, and an account with grants.gov. We have lots and lots of resources on our website, which we encourage you to look at. And I think that's it. I think we'll just open up for questions, Emma.
Well, let me just touch on this last one too, that if you got through all of that and you still think, yeah, I think this could be good, or maybe I want a little more one-on-one brainstorming or a little more feedback on my project, we're available for one-on-one technical assistance support. So what we're asking everybody to do is fill out this intake form so we can track everybody and make sure we get you the assistance that you need. I would recommend waiting maybe until the NOFO comes out. Again, Andy said it's supposed to come out any day now. And once it comes out, then you're welcome to reach out to us. But we want to make sure that when you reach out to us, you have read the NOFO, you know what is being asked of you so that we can actually effectively support you in your application. And then, so as I said, there are some questions we cannot answer. And so we may advise you to go to this NIFA address, and you can ask them direct questions, sometimes with questions around infrastructure funding, entity funding. Sometimes going to them is a better option because they may decide that it's worthwhile to take the risk, and Andy and I may not be sure if it is worthwhile to take the risk. Yeah, so I think with that, I'm going to pass it over to Alyssa and we'll get into some questions.